everyone. My name is Chloe Coppett with Exergy. I appreciate you joining us today for our conversation regarding LL97 and the implications that the updated regulations will have on business owners in New York. We're joined by Rich Parker and Eli Greenberg. So we'll be asking them some questions just to get some industry insight into the matter. But in the meantime, just to let you guys know, you are being recorded. So if you have an issue with that, feel free to hop off and we can always share the information with you guys another way. But to get things started, I will let you guys get right into it. Whoever wants to go first. Eli, I guess we can start with you. Just kind of a background on Kelvin Systems and what you guys are doing in the space, and then we can go into Rich next.
Yeah, sure. So Kelvin Systems, used to be known as Radiator Labs. We decarbonize legacy buildings. So we offer smart radiator covers, heat pumps, thermal batteries, and we have a turnkey solution to decarbonize what we consider legacy buildings. So anything really built before 1975. And what we're looking at with electrification is our solution. It's about 10% of the cost of full electrification, provides 80% of the benefits, also helps to generate new revenues for the building through demand response. But the core product that we're known for, which is the smart radiator cover, that saves about 25% on average for buildings, will help any building comply requirements for 2024. And then our hybrid solution will get you in compliance for 2030 and beyond. We've got thousands of installations around New York City. So yeah, excited to be here and share more.
Awesome, thank you. How about you, Rich?
Hi, Chloe. Thanks for having me. So I'm the CEO of the Metro Group, and the Metro Group was a company started in 1925. So for about almost the past 100 years, we've been an essential solutions provider, really a trusted source for providing services for the critical systems throughout a building. Our key services include water treatment. We have 10,000 buildings in New York City under contract, doing closed loops, boilers, domestic water systems, do cooling towers. So really the only company that could do a turnkey solution to Local Law 77, everything from 3 times a week testing, doing the document uploads, the mechanical closing and shutdown of those buildings. We give a digital interface to see and archive all your records on Local Law 77. Move over to the mechanical side of the boiler. We do all your cleanings, your repairs, your fireside cleanings, your waterside cleanings, the DEP, DOB compliance, burner overalls, 24/7, 365 burner service contracts. But importantly for these conversations, we do real-time energy management systems for boilers, just some smart controls in the boiler systems. We also have an air conditioning, HVAC cooling side where we install those systems, maintain those systems, again, 24/7, 365 services on those systems, and do the real-time energy management installations for those systems as well. And then on the electrical side, we have 80 of the best electricians in New York City. We have licensed electricians available 24/7, 365. Electrification will be a big part of this conversation, I assume. And everything from a full building upgrade. We'll do EV charging installations. We'll do low voltage installations. And for all of our services, again, available 24/7, 365. And we can essentially hit a building because we have over 250 mechanics, electricians, technicians in New York City. So, Christmas Eve, we can get to a building within 2.5-hour response time. And for installations, we offer kind of uniquely situated to be able to offer a turnkey MEP provider of the installations because we have the mechanical solutions in-house, the electrical solutions in-house, the air conditioning solutions in-house. We have the master plumbers. So we're able to save customers money, give them kind of a single source of accountability, and just the peace of mind of working with a company that's been around for 100 years for their key projects.
Yeah, I think that's really exciting to hear from both of you guys, and that's why we're super excited to have you guys on to kind of give us an overview of LL97 just because of your depth of knowledge and reach in New York with regards to what customers are going to have to be dealing with. So, whoever would like to start, I'd love to hear from both of you guys on all of the matters, but I was curious if you could give the audience an overview of LL97, and why New York City is doing this or has decided to implement these regulations.
Yeah, sure. So Local Law 97 was enacted in 2019. It's part of what they call the Climate Mobilization Act. And so the idea is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from buildings. So buildings in New York are about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions in the city. So the idea is that starting next year, buildings that are over 25,000 square feet have to comply with a set of emissions caps based on occupancy type. So those caps vary, if you're residential, industrial, commercial, et cetera. And then the goal is that, buildings will reduce emissions 40% by 2030 and then 80% by 2050 in order to motivate buildings to comply. If they don't meet certain caps at those times, there's a carbon fine for excessive emissions over the threshold for your respective buildings. So in order to comply with Local Law 97, buildings will need to implement various energy efficiency measures, electrification measures, to space heating, domestic hot water, cooling systems. Depends on the type of building, but the overarching goal is to reduce emissions and in fossil fuel usage in buildings.
That's great, Eli. Only things I'll add is because it was very comprehensive, just the scope of the law. So the buildings, as Eli mentioned, that over 25,000 square feet, it's roughly close to 50,000 buildings in New York City. And, there are over 1 million buildings in New York City, but 50,000 comprises about 60% of the built out space. So it's the majority of the built out space because it gets all your large buildings. It also, by addressing the top, these biggest buildings, dropping these greenhouse gas emissions in line with the law's goals will allow the city right there to reduce emissions by 50%. So as Eli mentioned, over 2/3 of greenhouse gas emissions for all of New York City come from buildings. And that's why this became a really key target of, as Eli mentioned, the Climate Mobilization Act.
Got it. And so I know you mentioned there's the 50,000 buildings, but there's over 1 million in New York. Are there certain buildings that are exempt to LL97 or that are, I guess, specifically required to follow these new regulations?
Yeah, so like we said, buildings over 25,000 square feet.
Got it.
There are a number of exceptions. So city-owned buildings, places of worship, hospitals, healthcare facilities, they're exempted. There's slightly different rules for buildings where you have affordable housing, rent stabilized or rent controlled. There's prescriptive measures to comply with the law. So there's definitely some nuance there.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'll say that, to kind of open up a little bit some of those the distinct rules or the nuances for affordable housing. So this is buildings that have over 35% rent regulated buildings, rent regulated apartments, and those dwellings, as Eli was mentioning, you basically within the first year you have to file a report, 2025 report. However, you can either certify, through a registered design professional that you meet the requirements for 2035 and beyond, or you can certify that you've hit all the prescriptive energy conservation measures called ECMs, as Eli was mentioning. And if you do that, if you're one of these buildings, so a building that's attached to NYCHA, funded by PACT, if you're an HFDC co-op building, Section 8 housing. So these are a lot of buildings that fall. So it's real important to know if you're one of these rent regulated or income limited buildings, income regulated buildings, because there's a completely different pathway, alternative pathway to compliance you can pursue. If you are a Mitchell-Lama building, you may not have to essentially file your report until 2035. So there's some different measures. And then, as Eli was mentioning, houses of worship, city-owned buildings, they're outside of it. But to be clear, it is the majority of commercial and residential properties over 25,000 square feet. So majority of those properties are under the covered population. We'll apply to them.
So I understand that LL97, the main goal is to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions for New York. What are the certain parameters, though, that people or I guess that the city is going to be measuring and reporting on?
Yeah, so they're going to be reporting on greenhouse gas emissions from buildings, and so looking at the underlying energy usage. So, are you still burning, number two, fuel oil? How much natural gas are you still burning? And then what electricity are you consuming? And each one of those has emissions factors. And as part of Local Law 97, there are different energy factors for tons of carbon related to each fuel type. And so you can go through and add up and say, well, you use so many BTUs of gas or the equivalent amount of kilowatt hours, and calculate what the emissions will be.
Got it.
Yeah, and to add to that, in essence, some of the more recent rules have updated that. They basically take the covered buildings and break them down into tranches of 60 different property types, as specified by the Energy Star portfolio. So, and this was real important. This was real helpful for buildings because different kinds of buildings have very different energy intensity usage. So, a warehouse, right, will be different from a supermarket, will be different than a residential building. So it is first off real important to make sure that how you are being documented in the system corresponds correctly, accurately to which kind of property type you are. And then, essentially it assigns coefficients of emission factors for different types of fuel and different types of energy usage. So electricity, and even where you get that electricity from, is it utility electricity? Is it decentralized energy generation? Is it natural gas? Is it oil? There's a different coefficient assigned to all those. You take those coefficients, you multiply them out by essentially your consumption, and that's a measure of basically the coefficient of that multiplied by the amount of fuel you're using or electricity generation you're using will give you essentially your emissions. Then you take that, and here's another thing that's real important is your square footage of your property accurate? Because essentially you take your total emissions, you divide that out by the square footage of your property, and now you get to a measure of your emissions per square feet. So all these measures, what kinds of energy you're using, what you're consuming, what you're emitting, and the overall square footage of your building, as well as the type of property that you are, those are all real important, and those are the parameters that the city is using to benchmark your property. And importantly, many properties, as we know, are mixed use. So even there lies an opportunity to make sure that your building is being held accountable to the right standard. What are the types of use throughout your facility? And how can we aggregate your energy score and your square footage and allocate that all properly to the types of usage that are in your property?
Right. So it sounds like it would be a big undertaking for, a business owner to start implementing these regulations if they haven't already done so. Is there, I couldn't remember if you guys had mentioned, is there a deadline that they're all required to have met these benchmarks, so to speak?
Yeah, so May 1st, 2025 is the deadline. But a lot of buildings are sort of already set up for that. So as part of Local Law 84, buildings are required to do energy benchmarking. So through that process, they're documenting their energy use. And once you have that energy use, as Rich was talking about, then you can do all the calculations to determine what your carbon emissions are on a square footage basis. So you sort of have the baseline right now. And then understanding the baseline will help inform, what measures you can take in your building so that you can be in compliance by May 1st, 2025.
Got it. Rich, I wanted to touch on something that you had mentioned with regard to making sure, and correct me if I'm wrong in rephrasing this, basically making sure your business is categorized correctly. In the same sense, I understand that building owners are required to file annual reports on their business. So is there a penalty for failing to do so? I'm assuming there is. I just was curious if you had any insight into that further.
Yeah, good question. So you start off with, as Eli was saying, by 2025, you're filing for your 2024 covered year. So really, you are held accountable to the emissions from your building next year. Just again, you're filing 2025 to reflect what happens in 2024. You want to make sure you file that report. If you don't, there are some pretty onerous penalties. So first off, if you don't file the report, there's a fine of 50 cents per square foot of your building. Now, again, these are large buildings, 25,000 square feet or above, right? So if you're 25, if that's a small end, you're talking about a $12,500 fine. And then, it's New York City. You got lots of really, really big buildings. So those fines they're not trivial. By the way, if you fudge data, if you misrepresent what is on the report, it is not for the faint of heart. There's a $500,000 fine, and it's punishable by up to 30 days in prison. So again, you want to file this accurately, you want to file it correctly, you want to file it on time. Those are
Definitely.
basic.
Well, I feel like that's also something where it might feel overwhelming to people to make sure all that information is correct. Is there tools or websites or any resource like that either of you are aware of or would recommend to help business owners navigating in terms of their filing?
Yeah, I mean, so all this has to be done by a registered professional, so
Okay.
licensed architect, licensed engineer. So if you don't already have an energy auditor or a building professional you work with, you should find one, and essentially, you can make it their responsibility. I'm sure Rich's company has tools. We have tools that can help you understand that. There's also tools you can use from Energy Star Portfolio. And so there's a tremendous amount of resources out there, and it's very quick to you could have someone do a calculation and you can double some of the other tools and see how they match up, just if you want to be sure.
Cool. So we discussed about failing to file the annual report on your greenhouse gas emissions. What if a business owner, their building, were to fail meeting those requirements for the year in terms of energy intensity, the greenhouse gas goals set by the city? Are they penalized for not being able to meet those requirements? Are they given credit for trying? How is that going to work out?
Yeah, so the fine is $268 a ton for every ton of carbon you're over your respective threshold. Going back to what we were talking about before with affordable housing, those buildings have prescriptive measures, so they're just things that they need to do in order to comply. And so it'll be different for different buildings, but and the bottom line is that if you're over the threshold, there's a financial penalty for being above that number.
Yeah. So that's absolutely right, and agree. To kind of add to that, one of the things the city has done a pretty good job of communicating as of late is at the end of the day, they want carbon reduction. It's not really a fine collection exercise, however cynical we may be about that, because the fines would be tremendous. There's been studies by Real Estate Board New York that would say something like 3,700 buildings won't meet the requirements as of right now by 2025, and because it ratchets down and gets more stringent over time, it's almost 14,000 buildings by 2030. And so your 2025 number, they're talking about potentially this independent study was showing $250 million a year in fines that would imply. And then you go out to 2030 and it'd be close to 900 million. So getting closer to $1 billion in fines. So the city's aware of that. And again, they want people's attention. They're getting people's attention. But people like the commissioner of sustainability have been talking about at the end of the day, they want to see good faith efforts for compliance. And so if you are making these good faith efforts and you can demonstrate that, they are saying that there's leniency and consideration in that fine levying against a property. Now, some people I think hear that and they're like, get out of jail free, right?
Mhm.
So I'm going to make a good faith effort, whatever that means, and then I won't have to pay a fine, and or I can take it slow and just get around to it I want to. And I think it's exact opposite. I think if what you should be doing is basically understanding where you are now, getting an action plan now, showing that because it's not as if you can just show up and say, we didn't do anything, we looked into it, we heard about it, or we didn't hear about it, and that constitutes a good faith effort. That won't fly. But if you can show that, look, the property was taking a lot of, let's call it these prescriptive measures. And by the way, for me, the prescriptive measures that's the low-hanging fruit. That's the kind of,
Definitely.
I think the no-brainer stuff that every property should be doing. I think it costs you money not to do these things anyhow. They pay for themselves. I mean, insulating your piping, you can get a payback period of 1 year in insulating your piping. Doing things like maintaining your heating system, repairing your leaks. Some of the, the real important things I'll hear a little bit more about what Eli's company is doing, but with your radiators and making your radiators more efficient. And again, going in that direction. Those are definitely the kinds of things you need to be doing. Fixing your steam traps, master venting. These are all the kinds of things that that constitute the prescriptive measures that are the alternative pathways of compliance for the affordable housing buildings. Those are the kinds of things every building should be looking at doing anyhow. They save you money, and they'll start to constitute some of your good faith efforts of compliance. Lighting's an easy one. So looking at your building and saying, do we have vacancy sensors? Do we have, time sensors to turn off? Do we have LED lighting? Can save a lot just right there doing that kind of stuff. Those are some of the many things that people should be doing anyhow.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, there's 13 prescriptive measures. So like what you're saying, I mean, it's all about pipe insulation, temperature control, individual control in units. So you could just go through the checklist and check them off in your property.
A real the settings for your heating and cooling system. So again, real-time energy management systems, RTEM systems. There's something that the utilities will oftentimes offer subsidies to install. And this can oftentimes impact your energy savings between 10 and 20%. So you think about what a building spends on fuel potentially. There's an ROI right there of 1 year. You can get the cost subsidized, and it will help you out with your local I-97 compliance. And those are all the things you can start to show. Hey, we are making a good faith effort to reduce our carbon, as well as other things. So that I would say those are some real easy places to start. Just get started to make that good faith effort. Think about those fines.
Yeah, definitely. So if I heard correctly, at one point we had said that a lot of the buildings are pretty much ready or have the ability to participate in these new regulations or in the new process. But will a lot of the buildings need a significant investment with regard to retrofitting their ability to meet the requirements, or is it more so of what you mentioned, just improving your processes, your operational efficiencies?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think it depends on the building type, commercial versus multifamily. Depends on the underlying energy use intensity. So, how much energy are you consuming per square foot in the building right now? Obviously, if there's a lot of inefficiencies, it could be that there's a lot of upgrades needed. It's probably that you need some additional boiler controls, temperature sensors, heating controls. It could be insulation. It could be small things that have a big impact for the building. And so I think the first step is kind of look at the underlying numbers. Where are you consuming energy? How much energy are you consuming? Is it coming from space heating? Is it coming from cooling? Is it coming from domestic hot water production or some other process in the building? And then from there, could inform the different types of measures you want to take to make your building more efficient.
Got it.
And putting in perspective again the scale and scope. If you just start from that from that level, right, the goals that, again, it ratchets down, so ratchets down to these sort of, more stringent requirements over time. By 2024, the estimate is something like 20% of those covered properties will need to do something, or they incur penalties if they do nothing. That's the other way to say it. They would incur penalties if they do nothing. Now, what that something is, that's where you've really got to get a sense of where you are, how far over you are. By 2030, it's 76% of properties. The vast majority of the properties are looking at a fine of some kind. So, now what is it you need to do about that? You need to be aware of what it is and the amount that it is. And then you can start asking yourself, because it's not a one size, I don't feel it's a one size fits all answer. There's an efficient frontier that you have to understand for your property, understand your financing cycle, where's your equipment in its life cycle anyhow? Are you coming up on a major end of life replacement? In which case you need to be thinking about these things anyhow. But all those things will determine what maybe makes the most sense for you to do. But if you do nothing, 76% of the properties, vast majority, are looking at fines hitting them as of 2030. And if you remember that calculation that Eli mentioned earlier, $268 per ton that you're over, it's not a trivial amount because these are large buildings per square foot.
Got it.
Per metric ton that you're over. And then there's also that importance, again, of those good faith measures. Those good faith measures to help mitigate that.
Right.
Yeah, that's perfect, because I was going to ask you guys if there's any specific types of projects or investments, I guess, that building owners would need to act upon in order to meet compliance. But it sounds like we pretty much touched on a lot of those. And, with regards to the incentives, Rich, I know that you had mentioned that utilities will, give you a return on investment for, I believe it was a meter you had mentioned. Is there any other incentives or even financing available to customers to help them get started and on the right path?
There are, though. I would love to go back to your point a little bit about the projects that they'll do.
Right.
If you're okay with talking a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, definitely. Well? I would love to hear more.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, I think we could start with, so I think Eli's company's come up with some exciting technologies. I think that's an, example of projects people could look at. So, if you want to kind of speak to that first, Eli, and I can maybe add to it.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about some of the technologies and the incentives. So, the core product we have is it's a smart radiator cover. So it works on all types of radiators, cast iron, recessed convectors. So the first step we do in a building is cover those radiators, make the steam distribution or the hydronic system more energy efficient. And then once you get that under control, then we move on to hybrid electrification. So we have heat pumps, and so we'll go around and replace air conditioning systems with window or sleeve heat pumps. This lets you do what we call hybrid electrification, so that heat pump runs for 300 days of the year. And then on the coldest days of the year, you only have to turn the steam system on. So you end up, running on electricity for most of the year, and that's a very cost-effective way to do that. As part of the electrification package, we also have a thermal battery that lets you store energy store heating or cooling for 3 to 4 hours, depending upon the season, and that lets you move over to time of use rates, so your electricity rates are actually lower for the building. And then beyond that, we've got solutions for domestic hot water. Domestic hot water is 30% of emissions in a building, in a multifamily building. So getting those under control is really important. And if you have a separate domestic hot water system, that would allow you to turn the boiler off for most of the year, or maybe about 50% of the year, depending on the case. So there's different strategies you can do to get your emissions under control. And then in order to pay for it all, there's a variety of incentives. So Con Ed, National Grid have incentives through their, they got a multifamily contractor program. There's also incentives for affordable housing. And those incentives vary. I mean, there's an incentive for boiler controllers. There's incentives for insulation. Our products receive incentives. There's additional incentives for air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. There's a lot of programs out there. There's also the incentive tax credits that are part of the Inflation Production Act passed last year that came into effect in January. Our products, the Cozy, the Smart Radiator Cover, qualifies for investment tax credits. So there's a whole ecosystem out there. And then on top of that, there's also a lot of financing sources. We as a company are able to bring financing for our customers. So there's a no money down option. So, they just get instant savings and basically pay through a subscription because we bring the financing. But if not, there's lots of other groups that have financing available for these types of projects. So, you see what's out there, and there's a lot of information there.
Cool.
Yeah, it's great. Just a couple things I'll add is, so behind me, right? So this is Metro's green roof on our building, and we were talking. Eli mentioned how domestic hot water can sometimes constitute 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions from a building. There's been studies with doing roofing work that can save between 10 and 20%, depending on the building, depending on the layout, its energy usage. And a green roof, we love it. Again, we did it for ourselves. Essentially, there's money to pay for that. So it's kind of marries that incentives and project conversation. So there are certain parts of the city where you're getting a triple rebate program that will pay for the majority of a green roof installation. They're pretty phenomenal in terms of extending life of the roof. They add to biodiversity within a city. They reduce the heat island effect in the city. It can reduce the overall greenhouse gas emissions. Other things I'll say, this kind of really does marry up with what Eli was saying, is we've looked at a number of projects and seen that many buildings can get to be compliant through 2030s, to 2035 at least. So now you're talking 12 years. And there'll be people like Eli's companies coming out with real great technologies in that time anyhow. So there's something nice about at least going through to that period by doing what I'll call low carbon retrofits. So this is doing things like making sure your boiler is more efficient. You have a high condensing hydronic boiler. You have linkageless burners. Again, you're insulating that piping. Eli's talking about a dedicated domestic hot water system, right? If that can be attached to an air source heat pump or something like that, between those measures, you can sometimes see 50 to 60% greenhouse gas reductions in buildings just by doing those kinds of things. Having VFDs throughout a building on the motors, the variable frequency drives in the motors, and again those real-time energy management systems on the boilers with feedback from the tenant space sometimes. That can also just sort of help make your existing equipment work a lot better without doing the deep electrification. That is, again, going to be the smart move and the right move for buildings. You got to look and see what works for you. But many buildings can have compliance for a long time with what I'll call are these low carbon retrofits. And there are subsidies to pay for that. Again, in keeping with the things Eli was saying, you can also purchase renewable energy credits. Those are other greenhouse gas offsets that are available. The New York City Accelerator Program, that's a great source of different rebate programs as well, available for people, and a good resource.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely have to maybe provide that information to people after this meeting in case they are curious. So feel free to reach out if you guys would like a direct link to that information, and I will connect with Rich and Eli. You guys kind of already touched on what I was going to finish off with, and that was, we've talked a lot about your companies in regards to what you guys are doing currently. I guess with specific to New Yorkers and meeting the demands of LL97, I just was curious, wanted to give you guys the floor if there was additional things that you guys are doing that we haven't touched on that would be interesting to, specifically people in New York who are having to deal with LL97.
Yeah, I would say we're there's a little feedback. We're laser focused on multifamily buildings, and our approach is to, decarbonize buildings in a modular way. So we start with the Cozy, as I mentioned, the radiator cover, and then we do heat pumps, we do thermal batteries, and we're really in a position to be the turnkey decarbonization partner. We work with companies like Rich's to install our technology. So there's a nice synergistic effect between both of our groups. So yeah, we're excited to talk to people in the audience. Happy to analyze your building. Happy to tell you what a project might look like. Talk about the financing options, and show you what the benefits will be for 2024, but also into the future.
So one of the things we do is you can email us at sustainability@metrogroupinc.com, and what I'll describe it as we try to meet you where you are, wherever that is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a building that you've done nothing with this so far, that's okay. We can kind of get you started. Take a look at the snapshot of your building, give a sense of where you are and why you are there. So what right now does the city filing suggest for your property? And again, going back to something I was talking about earlier, that's real important because some of that can just be a data accuracy exercise. Is the building square footage right? Is the property type that you're being associated with, is that correct? Are your emission filings uploaded correctly? So getting all that stuff right, those are real important. And we can basically then take a snapshot of your building and say, look, here's where you are. Here are the fines you're looking at in whatever time frame, 2024 to 2030 or 2030 to 2035. Very few buildings will be out past that where they're clear 2035 and beyond. And what's driving that? What are the emissions in your building? What are the sources of equipment that are driving that for you? And then from there, it's everything from, again, the prescriptive energy measures that we talked about, which I'll say those are low investment, no brainer things you should be doing anyhow. That'll help improve your score. Go ahead and validate that you are making this good faith effort. There's the low carbon retrofits that may be something that makes sense for you given where you are. The other thing we do is we work with some best in class engineering talent, which for many people will allow us to do what I'll call is really maybe the gold standard, which is once you get a snapshot of where you are, coming up with what I'll call your local law 97 compliance roadmap or your master energy retrofit plan for your building. And so what that looks like is saying, okay, hey, given your space, what is the full spectrum of measures you can take? What would be the cost associated with that? What would be the returns on investment that would come with making those investments? Because it's a multivariable equation. There's not a one size fits all. You have the cash outlays of the retrofit. You have the energy savings that come to do with the work. And then you have what I'll call is this penalty avoidance. And somewhere in there, and it's based on your building, it's based on is it rental? Is it not rental? All those factors may come into play. Do you have different occupants in your building? What's the overall strategy and plan for the property? Those are all things that will inform what's the right strategy for you to do. But giving you that kind of holistic view can then say, okay, what's my turnkey solution that we want to pursue? And then, like Eli, we work with, we can help as well. You secure the financing associated with the projects you may choose to pursue that would be right for your property.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love how you both touched on one of your main focuses is it's not a one size fits all, and each customer needs a different approach, which I think should be comforting to anyone in the audience. If you're someone that is having to navigate these regulations, that there are companies out there like Metro Group and Kelvin Systems that can adapt to each customer specifically, which I think is really important for people to not feel so overwhelmed when they're navigating the energy market overall, so to speak. Which kind of drives me to, I have one more question for you guys. I just want to always make sure that we're touching all bases with anything that's relevant or important to what we're discussing. And so I was just curious, is there anything with regard to LL97 to New York that you guys have heard of or are seeing that that maybe I haven't asked you about? And if not, that's totally fine.
One thing I guess I'll add is I think it's important not to lose the forest for the trees. Local law 97, I think there's been a lot of really intelligent thought put into this law. If you really look at the rigor and the attention to detail, I think there's been a lot of smart people dedicated, working really hard. 100%, like any one of these other local laws, there's all these, okay, this is an open question. We could use more clarity here. But I think that I will say in this case, because I definitely feel that about other laws, that if that where that exists, they're aware of it, they're working on it, and that's more to do with the complexity of it. But if you pull back into why are we doing this anyhow? Because I think it's easy to kind of get, this is burdensome. It's another burden in New York City. And to be clear, this is the most, assertive, ambitious set of climate combating regulations any city globally is undertaking. So really, this is New York City at the vanguard. Although there are other cities, Boston, DC, that are going to start following suit. So really, New York City is a vanguard here. But this all ties to essentially getting to carbon neutrality by 2050. And why are we talking about it anyhow? There's studies done by international climate scientists saying that that is the requirement we have to hit. Again, there's no freeloader exercise here. This is globally what we have to hit to avoid seeing temperatures go to 1.5 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. When that happens, so even just with the measures of this law, by 2030, they're projecting they're going to save between 50 to 150 New Yorkers' lives every year, prevent over 100 hospitalizations a year, taking out over 6 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere. And we know in this past year, air quality is a big topic for New Yorkers. We're living that. Things that were kind of these, far off things to contemplate are now here. But if you can avoid those 1.5 degrees centigrade levels, I mean, these are really catastrophic things that start to be avoided. Coral reefs going away, sea levels rising 1 to 3 feet, sort of these catastrophic storms happening more regularly. So this is one of the things where, yes, it's expensive. It's going to be expensive to do a lot of these things. And by 2050, we're definitely headed towards electrification. There's just a path to get there. But the expense of not doing it, is something that I think, globally, society, people have said, well, that's even more expensive, right? So we need to undertake doing this. Again, it's the kinds of things, it's saving people's lives, it's preventing hospitalizations, and avoiding some of the worst disasters we haven't even gotten to for climate change. So I think the one thing I'll say is this isn't going away. There's a lot of energy and motivation around making sure that we kind of keep moving down this pathway. And just it's important, I think, to realize, well, why? Why is that important for people?
Right.
Yeah, I would just add two things. I'd say number one, we sort of talked about this a little bit, but there's a ton of resources out there, so you shouldn't feel like local law 97 is something scary or onerous or expensive. There's a lot of work that's been done to tell you how to do it. You can just kind of follow the roadmap, and so that you can, we can share those resources. You can find those resources, but it's not intimidating. I would say the second thing, as an asset owner, all of these measures that you will be implementing in your building will make your building a healthier building. It will increase the net operating income of your building. And so it will make your asset more valuable. The other thing that we didn't talk about and is slowly part of the conversation are, additional carbon reporting requirements that, mortgage lenders and other people in the real estate industry are going to start to look at. And so, underwriting a mortgage isn't just going to be about, what kind of tenants do you have in the building and what the rent roll looks like. It's going to look at the underlying energy systems and the carbon emitted from the building, because that presents a risk. And, implementing these energy efficiency measures and making your building compliant with local law 97 will ultimately make sure you have a healthier asset that has lower risk, that can generate more income.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think one of the things that's really entering now negotiations for long-term leases is this factor, thinking about what are the penalties. That's something that long-term commercial landlords or tenants didn't have to think about as much, but now it's a negotiating item for longer-term leases and subletting and things like that. And it's something that they're still doing work to figure out, well, what's the allocation of some of those things over time, the penalties, the burdens, to make sure that the right sort of entity is owning that requirement and that penalty over time.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have definitely learned a lot. So I'm really excited that we got to meet with you guys, and I really appreciate your time sharing your information and knowledge. And if you guys have emails that you wanted to share, I can also send those over to our audience. But if you guys have any questions for Rich or Eli that maybe you didn't think of in the moment, but did after the fact, feel free to let us know and we'll connect you with them. But also, if you guys want to leave your email here or a number that people can reach you at, feel free to do that if you'd like. But if not, I will go ahead and end the event.
Yeah, just for us, I think the easiest thing for people to do is sustainability at metrogroupinc.com. So we have sustainability experts who work for our company that can go ahead and get you started and answer your basic questions, as well as take you further down. What I'll say is I think every building has a local law 97 journey, and we can try to start guiding you down that journey that'll be right for your building.
Yeah, you can get in touch with us at sales@kel.vin, or you can email me directly at ely@kel.vin. So Eli at Kelvin.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I really appreciate y'all's time, and I will connect you with anyone that might reach out to us. So have a great day, everyone.
Sounds great. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having us, Chloe. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.